Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku lived in a cyberpunk world ruled by corporations. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The rain in Neomusudafan never truly washed anything clean. It was a thin, acidic drizzle that fell from a sky permanently bruised by chemical smog and the perpetual orange glow of the upper city. Down here, in the labyrinthine canyons of the Undercity, the rain collected in iridescent puddles that shimmered with leaked coolant, spilled synthale, and the ghostly reflections of 1,000 holographic advertisements. It hissed on hot chrome, sizzled on overloaded power conduits, and traced grimy paths down the ferroconcrete walls of tenement blocks stacked so high they seemed to groan under their own weight. Inside a shoebox-sized workshop tucked into the third-level sub-basement of the Kiashi Ward Market, Izuku Midoriya was deaf to the rain. His world had shrunk to the head of a pin. To the delicate tangle of myoelectric wires he was painstakingly resoldering with a microlaser. The air smelled of ozone, burnt flux, and the lingering scent of the instant nutrient paste he'd had for breakfast. A single, flickering lumen bulb dangled overhead, casting long, dancing shadows that made the scavenged parts lining his shelves look like the bones of forgotten machines. "Hold still, just a little," he muttered, his breath fogging the magnifying lens attached to his goggles. His client, a hulking street samurai named Goro, grunted. The man was a mountain of scarred flesh and second-hand chrome, his left arm a clunky, piston-driven relic that probably belonged in a cargo hauler. The piece Izuku was working on, however, was far more delicate, a Kiroshi optics implant, currently dangling from its socket by a frayed data ribbon. "It's glitching," Goro rumbled, his voice a low-frequency vibration that rattled the tools on Izuku's workbench. "Whole damn world's going pixelated. Saw a noodle stand turn into a goddamn dragon yesterday. It's not the processor, it's the power linkage," Izuku replied, his voice barely a whisper. He was in the zone, a state of pure analytical focus. His thin, callous fingers moved with a surgeon's precision. "The insulation on the primary nerve link has worn through. It's causing data corruption every time you blink. You're lucky it didn't short out your whole wetware interface." He applied a tiny bead of solder. A wisp of smoke curled upwards, smelling metallic and sharp. With a final, gentle nudge from a pair of magnetized tweezers, the connection was made. "Okay," Izuku said, flipping up his goggles. His face, pale and freckled, was illuminated by the soft blue diagnostic light now glowing steadily from the implant. His eyes, large and startlingly green, were wide with concentration. "Try it now." "Easy blinks," Goro's chrome eye whirred softly as the lens refocused. The angry red arrow light at the corner of the socket faded to a calm, operational blue. The big man blinked once, then twice. A slow grin spread across his face, revealing a few synth ivory teeth among the gaps. "Clear as a corporate spire on a clear day," he boomed, rotating his head. "Kid, you're a damn miracle worker. The back alley ripperdoc who installed this said it was a total loss." Izuku felt a small, warm flush of pride. "He was trying to sell you a new one," he said, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. "This is a Gen 3 Kiroshi. They're built to last. The new models are all designed with planned obsolescence. Cheaper parts, firmware that bricks itself after 2 years. He couldn't stop the flow of information once it started. It's a common corporate tactic to ensure repeat business, locking consumers into an upgrade cycle they can't afford to miss and can't afford to maintain. The profit margins on proprietary repair kits alone are." He trailed off, realizing he was rambling. Goro just chuckled, unaffected by the mini-lecture. He tapped the side of his newly repaired eye. "You know your stuff, fleshy." "It's weird." The word hung in the air, sharp and clinical. Fleshy. The standard, casual insult for someone like him. Someone with no chrome, no visible augments, no subdermal plating or integrated data jacks. In a city where a person's worth was often measured by the quality and quantity of their cybernetics, Izuku Midoriya was a zero. Pure, unmodified, vulnerable organic material. He forced a tight smile. "Just good with my hands." Goro tossed a handful of chipped cred sticks onto the workbench. The clatter was satisfyingly heavy. "Keep the change." And if you hear of anyone offloading a hydraulic pump for a Tetsa model arm, send M my way. With a final nod, the giant ducked out of the tiny workshop, his bulk momentarily blocking the neon-lit hallway before he disappeared into the market's throng. Izuku was alone again with the hum of his diagnostic rig and the steady patter of the rain. He carefully stacked the cred sticks, his mind already calculating. This was enough for rent, 3 weeks' worth of nutrient paste, and maybe, if he was lucky, a new power cell for his holographic projector. The projector was his one true luxury. Once the creds were secured in a locked box under a loose floor plate, Izuku turned to the back wall of his workshop. It was his sanctuary, a stark contrast to the organized chaos of the rest of the room. This wall was a meticulously curated shrine. It was dominated by a large, scavenged piece of ferroglass, upon which he'd pasted dozens of printed articles, grainy screen caps, and hand-drawn technical diagrams. At the center of it all, a single, high-resolution image glowed with an almost holy light, a man, impossibly large, with a smile that could outshine a corporate searchlight. His two most prominent features were his golden, V-shaped cranial implants that resembled rabbit ears, and the sheer, unadulterated power that seemed to radiate from him, the legendary runner. The ghost in the machine of the last decade. The man they called All Might. Izuku slotted the newly purchased power cell into his projector. The machine whirred to life, casting a 3-foot-tall column of shimmering blue light in the center of the room. With a few keystrokes on his terminal, the light coalesced. The image was fragmented, corrupted data recovered from a server wiped during an Omnicorp raid a decade ago. It showed a figure, All Might, standing atop the Takamatsu Sky Bridge. Corporate enforcer drones, sleek, black machines of death, swarmed around him like angry hornets. He was laughing. The sound was distorted, but the pure, booming joy in it was unmistakable. Analysis log 734. Izuku whispered, his voice hushed with reverence as he started a new audio recording. His eyes were glued to the hologram, tracking every minute detail. Footage is from the Takamatsu Sky Bridge incident. Omnicorp official reports listed as a structural failure due to seismic activity. This data fragment suggests, otherwise. In the hologram, All Might moved. It wasn't the clunky, piston-driven motion of a man in a power suit, nor the unerringly smooth glide of a full-body cyborg. It was something else entirely. It was explosive, organic power. He launched himself into the air, a blur of red, white, and blue, and met a drone head-on. The resulting explosion was a silent flare of pixelated static. The power output is impossible, Izuku mumbled, his fingers flying across his keyboard, running diagnostic simulations. There's no visible power pack, no exhaust, no thermal signature consistent with a high-yield energy source. His physical form shows extreme myoelectric enhancement, but the force generated exceeds the theoretical limits of any known muscle fiber weave. A standard chrome endoskeleton would shatter under that kind of stress. It's not just tech. He zoomed in on All Might's arm as he delivered a punch that sent a shockwave rippling through the air, crumpling 3 drones at once. The image distorted heavily. There's an energy field, a bioelectric surge that precedes every major action. It's not a weapon discharge, it's emanating from him. Could it be a quirk? He shook his head, dismissing the thought almost as quickly as it came. Quirks were genetic anomalies, messy and unpredictable glitches in the human code. They were rare, and those who had them were usually pariahs or lab rats for the corporations. A quirk powerful enough to do that? It was unheard of, and integrating a quirk with high-end chrome was notoriously difficult, often resulting in psychosis or catastrophic system failure. All Might was too controlled, too precise. No, Izuku concluded. Not a quirk. Not standard chrome. Something new. Or old. A lost technology? He spent the next hour cross-referencing the footage with other fragments he'd collected over the years. All Might stopping a runaway maglev train with his bare hands. All Might single-handedly dismantling a Yakuza chrome gang. All Might, in his final recorded appearance, walking out of the flaming ruins of an Omnicorp research tower, carrying a dozen civilians to safety. After that day, he had simply vanished. The heroic stopped. The hope he inspired began to fade, replaced by the ever-present, oppressive glow of the corporations. To most people in Neomuzurifu, All Might was a myth, a glitch in the city's history, a comforting bedtime story for people living in the gutter, to help them forget the cold, hard reality of the corporate glow from above. But to Izuku, he was proof. Proof that one person could stand against the system. Proof that you didn't have to be a corporate slave or a crime lord to have power. Proof that a hero could exist, even in a world of chrome and concrete. His obsession was the one thing that kept the crushing weight of his own inadequacy at bay. A fleshy, a nobody, dreaming of heroes. It was pathetic, and he knew it, but in the privacy of his workshop, surrounded by the ghost of All Might, he could almost believe it was possible. A loud, aggressive rapping on his workshop's metal door shattered his concentration. Izuku jumped, fumbling to shut down the projector. The hologram of All Might dissolved into a shower of blue pixels just as the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The figure standing there was a stark embodiment of everything Izuku was not. Katsuki Bakugo was lean and sharp-edged, dressed in the sleek, black fabrics of a corporate junior executive. His spiky, ash-blonde hair was the only chaotic thing about him, but it was his arms that drew the eye. From the elbows down, they were state-of-the-art cybernetics, a beautiful and terrifying fusion of polished tungsten and matte black polymers. The Detonarat Mark IV blast gauntlets. Military-grade, custom-fitted, and lethally powerful. A soft, orange light pulsed from the complex machinery housed within his palms. "Still playing with your ghost stories, Deku?" Bakugo sneered. His voice was a rasp, like grinding metal. He stepped inside, his expensive boots making clean, sharp sounds on the grimy floor. He surveyed the cluttered workshop with a look of undisguised contempt. Izuku flinched at the old nickname. Deku. Data Error Code Unit. A useless, corrupted piece of code. Bakugo had branded him with it when they were children, back when they both lived in the same soulless residential block. A time before Bakugo's parents had climbed the corporate ladder, securing their son a place in the OmniCorp Junior program and the finest chrome money could buy. "Keikaken," Izuku stammered, instinctively hiding his hands behind his back. "What are you doing here? This is way below your pay grade." "Slumming it," Bakugo said, running a gloved finger along a dusty shelf and then inspecting it with disgust. "I'm on a procurement run for the RD department. Looking for a vintage processing chip. Thought I'd see if the city's most useless fleshy was still breathing the same recycled air." His crimson eyes landed on the wall, on Izuku's shrine. A cruel smile twisted his lips. "Seriously? You're still obsessed with this dead runner? All Might is a myth, a piece of viral marketing from a company that went bankrupt a decade ago. He's not real." "He is real!" Izuku shot back, a spark of defiance cutting through his fear. "The data proves it. The energy signatures, the eyewitness accounts from before OmniCorp scrubbed the net. Data can be faked, you idiot." Bakugo spat, stepping closer. The faint smell of ozone and burnt sugar, the signature discharge of his gauntlets, wafted from him. "The world isn't run by heroes with big smiles. It's run by contracts, by assets, by power. Real power." To emphasize his point, he held up his right hand. The plates on his palm retracted with a series of quiet, satisfying clicks, revealing a glowing emitter lens. A low hum filled the room. "This is real," Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "Detonarat Tech. Corporate sponsorship. A future at the top of the spire. While you're down here, patching up rusted-out gangers for pocket change, I'm being groomed for management. I'm building a career." "What are you building, Deku? A collection of fairy tales?" Izuku's jaw tightened. He wanted to say something, to defend his dream, to argue that being a hero was about more than just power and profit. But the words caught in his throat. In the face of Bakugo's gleaming, perfect chrome, his own bare hands felt soft and useless. His dream felt flimsy, a child's fantasy. "You haven't changed at all," Bakugo continued, his sneer deepening. He took another step, cornering Izuku against his workbench. "Still got that same stupid, vacant look in your eyes, like you're waiting for someone to come save you. Nobody is coming to save you, Deku. Not down here. In this world, you're either chrome, or you're scrap." He raised his hand, the orange glow intensifying. Izuku flinched, bracing himself for a blow, a blast, anything. Instead, Bakugo reached out and tapped the central image of All Might with his chrome finger. "This," he said softly, venomously, "is a lie. And you're a fool for believing in it." He then turned his palm towards a pile of junk metal in the corner of the workshop. Without any warning, there was a deafening crack. A controlled, concentrated explosion erupted from his hand. The blast was no bigger than a fist, but the heat and force were immense. The scrap metal was instantly superheated, twisted, and blackened. The air shimmered, and the acrid smell of cordite filled Izuku's lungs, making him cough. "That's power," Bakugo said, the light in his palm fading. He gave Izuku one last look of utter disdain. "Try analyzing that, you useless nerd." With that, he turned and strode out of the workshop, leaving Izuku alone with the smell of destruction, the ringing in his ears, and the bitter taste of his own powerlessness. Izuku stood frozen for a long time, his heart hammering against his ribs. The heat from the blast still warmed his face. He looked at the mangled pile of scrap, then at his own empty, fleshy hands. "You're either chrome, or you're scrap." The confidence he'd felt just moments before had evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. Bakugo was right. What was he even doing? A tech analyst? He was a glorified junkman, living in a basement, clinging to the story of a man who was probably long dead. His dream wasn't just impossible, it was a delusion. He needed air. The smell of cordite was choking him. Shakily, he pulled on a worn synth leather jacket, powered down his main terminal, and stepped out into the chaotic symphony of the Kiashi market. The rain had picked up, and the narrow street was a river of neon light. Holographic koi fish swam through the air advertising a new brand of synthetic sushi. The bass-heavy thrum of a nearby nightclub vibrated through the soles of his boots. People hurried past, a blur of flickering cyber eyes, chrome limbs, and rain-slicked trench coats. He walked without a destination, letting the crowd carry him along. He passed noodle stands where patrons slurped down steaming bowls of soy protein broth, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of the data text scrolling across the rims of their bowls. He passed black market stalls where shadowy vendors sold everything from illegal software and cracked military tech to suspiciously cheap organic organs floating in nutrient gel. The Undercity was a vibrant, chaotic, and brutal place. It was a dog-eat-dog world, and Izuku knew he was at the bottom of the food chain. All his life, he'd been told he was less than nothing, a quirkless child in a world that was just beginning to forget them, and a fleshy adult in a world that worshipped chrome. His wandering eventually led him to a wider plaza, one of the few open spaces in the Undercity. In the center, a massive holographic geisha, 20 stories tall, fanned herself, her movements slow and serene. Her smile was empty and placid. An advertisement for the Azuri Corporation's line of companion androids. Her glow cast a soft, ethereal light on the plaza below, a false moon for the sunless depths. It was then that he saw it. A flash of movement in the alley across the plaza. A figure in a dark, armored jumpsuit, moving with a fluid grace that was mesmerizing. They vaulted over a dumpster, their boots barely making a sound, and sprinted down the alley. Izuku recognized the gear instantly. Lightweight polymer armor, mag boots for wall running, a high-frequency blade sheathed on their back. It was a runner. Not a legend like All Might, but a real, working runner. Before Izuku could feel a thrill of excitement, the reason for the runner's haste appeared. Two figures dropped from a ledge above the alley entrance, landing with a heavy, metallic crunch that cracked the pavement. They were Omnicorp corporate enforcers. They weren't human, not anymore. They were full-body cyborgs, encased in matte black armor plating, their faces obscured by opaque, crimson visors. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized efficiency, their heavy-caliber rifles already raised and tracking their target. "Asset designated Slipstream," one of the enforcers announced, its voice a synthesized, emotionless monotone. "Cease all unauthorized activity. Surrender for corporate reprocessing." The runner, Slipstream, didn't even slow down. He drew his blade, a high-pitched whine filling the air as it activated, and slashed backwards, deflecting a volley of stun rounds. Sparks flew, illuminating the narrow alley. Izuku's heart leaped into his throat. He should run. He should melt back into the crowd like everyone else was doing. This was corporate business. Getting involved was a death sentence, but he couldn't move. His analytical mind, the one he used to diagnose faulty chrome, took over. The runner is fast, but his armor is light. Built for infiltration, not direct combat. The enforcers are slow but heavily armored. Their weakness is their joints, but their firing patterns are coordinated. He can't take them both head-on. As if proving his analysis correct, a third enforcer appeared at the other end of the alley, cutting off Slipstream's escape. The runner was boxed in. The crowd that had filled the plaza moments before had vanished, retreating into doorways and shadows. The only sounds were the hum of the enforcer's internal systems, the whine of Slipstream's blade, and the relentless, steady patter of the rain. Izuku watched, frozen, as the fight began. It was brutally efficient. Slipstream was a whirlwind of motion, his blade a silver blur. He managed to score a deep gash in one enforcer's leg actuator, causing it to stumble. But it was a fleeting victory. The other two laid down a coordinated field of suppressing fire, forcing the runner to stay on the defensive, his blade a desperate shield against the storm of plasma bolts. This wasn't like the All Might footage. There were no triumphant laughs, no impossible feats of strength. This was ugly, desperate, and real. This was the truth of being a runner. A bolt got through. It struck Slipstream in the shoulder, and his armor sizzled, melting like black wax. He cried out, a sharp gasp of pain, and stumbled. That was all the opening the enforcers needed. One of them surged forward, its movements impossibly fast for its size. It didn't use its rifle. It used its hand. The chrome fist smashed into Slipstream's chest with the force of a battering ram. There was a sickening crunch of breaking polymer, and beneath it, breaking bone. The runner was thrown back, slamming into the brick wall of the alley so hard that dust and debris rained down. His high-frequency blade clattered to the ground, its energy field dying with a pathetic fizzle. He was alive, but only just. He tried to push himself up, his movements weak and trembling. The lead enforcer stood over him, its featureless red visor seeming to stare down into the runner's very soul. It raised its rifle, the barrel pointed directly at Slipstream's head. There was no malice in the action. No anger. It was just a function. The completion of a task. Asset has failed to comply, the enforcer stated calmly. Initiating retirement protocol. Izuku's breath hitched. His mind screamed at him to look away, to run, to disappear. But his feet were rooted to the spot. He was seeing his dream, his grand, heroic fantasy, being executed in a dirty, rain-slicked alley. This was the reality of fighting the system. It didn't end with a city saved and a smiling hero. It ended with a plasma bolt to the head. The rifle charged with a low hum. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. He couldn't watch. A single, sharp crack echoed through the plaza. When he opened his eyes again, it was over. The enforcers stood for a moment, their internal scanners confirming determination. Then, with the same mechanical efficiency, they turned and fired grappling hooks onto the rooftops, hoisting themselves up into the perpetual twilight of the upper city. They left the body where it lay, just another piece of trash in the gutter. Slowly, cautiously, people began to emerge from the shadows. No one went near the alley. They averted their gazes, adjusted their collars, and hurried on their way, pretending they hadn't seen a thing. In Neo-Muzurufu, plausible deniability was a survival trait. Izuku, however, couldn't look away. He stared at the crumpled form in the alley, a dark shape against the wet ground. The soft, ethereal glow from the holographic geisha above seemed to mock the scene, painting the squalor in beautiful, pastel colors. The gutter and the glow. He finally understood. He had spent his life in the gutter, staring up at the glow of the corporate spires, at the glowing legend of All Might, and dreaming of flight. But the glow was a lie. It was a beautiful, captivating illusion designed to blind you to the brutal truth. The moment you tried to fly, the moment you became a threat, the system would swat you out of the sky and leave you broken in the filth. Bakugo's words echoed in his head, colder and sharper than before. This is a lie. And you're a fool for believing in it. With a heavy heart, Izuku turned away from the alley. The rain felt colder now, seeping into his jacket, into his bones. He walked back towards his workshop, the vibrant chaos of the market now feeling hollow and threatening. The holographic ads seemed predatory, the faces of the passers-by like blank masks. He re-entered his tiny basement home, the smell of ozone and burnt metal from Bakugo's blast still hanging in the air. He didn't turn on the main lights. He walked over to his back wall, to his shrine. In the dim light, the image of All Might, with his indomitable smile and his promise of a better way, seemed to stare back at him. It looked different now. Less like a symbol of hope, and more like a cruel joke. Izuku reached out, his hand trembling, and pressed the power button on the projector. The blue light died. The room was plunged into near darkness, the only illumination coming from the sliver of neon glow under the door. He stood there for an unknown amount of time, surrounded by the ghosts of his shattered dream. He clenched his fist, the soft, yielding feel of his own flesh and bone, a stark, painful reminder of what he was. A fleshy. A Deku. A fool. And for the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya truly, completely, believed it. The hours that followed were a waking nightmare. Izuku didn't sleep. He sat on his stool in the oppressive darkness of his workshop, the silence broken only by the incessant drumming of rain on the metal roof and the distant, mournful wail of a maglev train passing overhead. The single image of the runner, slipstream, executed with cold, corporate indifference, was burned onto the inside of his eyelids. Every time he blinked, he saw the flash of the plasma rifle, the slump of the body, the utter finality of it all. His shrine to All Might on the back wall was a formless shadow, a monument to a dead faith. The analytical part of his brain, the part that usually brought him comfort through order and logic, was running a cruel, endless loop. Probability of survival for an independent runner in Neo Musudafu against a determined corporate entity. Less than 0.01%. Conclusion: aspiration is illogical. Heroism is a fatal system error. He had spent his entire life looking for a sign, for proof that his belief in something better wasn't just a child's fantasy. The universe had finally provided one. It had shown him, in visceral, undeniable detail, exactly what happened to people who tried to be heroes. They died in filthy alleys, unmourned and forgotten, their bodies left for the municipal bioreclamation drones to collect like any other piece of trash. The energy that had once fueled his late-night study sessions and meticulous analyses was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching exhaustion. He felt as if a critical component of his own internal machinery had been ripped out, leaving only dangling wires and a gaping void. He was a fleshy. A Deku. And his dreams were scrap. It was a simple, brutal truth he could no longer deny. He must have drifted into a state of semi-consciousness, had slumped on his workbench, because a sudden, violent noise from the corridor outside jolted him awake. It wasn't the usual market clamor, it was the sharp, angry sound of metal striking metal, followed by a string of curses spat out in a voice that grated like rusted gears. Izuku's head shot up, his senses on high alert. His first instinct, a deeply ingrained habit from a lifetime of living in the gutter, was to kill the lights and stay quiet. His hand was already moving towards the main power switch when he heard a voice. A woman's voice, firm but laced with anxiety. "Look, I don't have any creds on me. I'm just passing through. Empty your pockets, Chrome Dome." A second, guttural voice snarled. "And that toolkit? Bet we could scrap that for a pretty price." Izuku crept to his workshop door, pressing his ear against the cold metal. He peered through the small, grime-streaked spy-hole. The scene in the narrow corridor was tense, illuminated by the flickering neon of a ramen stand sign. 3 figures, hulking and menacing, had a young woman cornered against the wall. He recognized the men instantly. They were part of the Scrappers, a low-level gang of tech vultures who made a living by ripping chrome off unsuspecting victims and selling it on the black market. Their own enhancements were a testament to their trade, a chaotic mismatch of stolen and jury-rigged parts. The leader, a brute with a sawtoothed jaw augmentation that sparked every time he spoke, was aptly named Sawtooth. The one on his left had an optical implant that was twitching violently, causing his head to jerk in spastic motions, glitch. The third, Breaker, had a massive, rust-pitted hydraulic arm that leaked a trail of dark fluid onto the floor. Their victim was a young woman about his age, with a round, expressive face and a short bob of brown hair. She was wearing a worn but clean Gravlift Mechanics jumpsuit, stained with grease and hydraulic fluid. A heavy toolkit was slung over her shoulder. Despite the terrifying situation, She wasn't cowering. Her jaw was set, her eyes wide but defiant. "This is a Holler brand industrial toolkit," she said, her voice impressively steady. "The magnetic locks are keyed to my biosignature. It's useless to you." Sawtooth laughed, a horrible, metallic grinding sound. "We'll get it open. Might have to take the hand with it, but we'll manage." He gestured with a grimy, three-fingered metal claw. "Now the pockets. Before Breaker here decides to test your skull's structural integrity." Izuku's blood ran cold. He should close the spy hole. He should retreat into the darkness of his workshop and pretend he heard nothing. This wasn't his fight. He was a fleshy. He was no hero. He had just spent the entire night accepting that fact. Getting involved was suicide. Just like Slipstream, a cold voice in his head whispered, but his eyes remained glued to the scene. He saw the subtle tremor in the woman's hands as she clutched the strap of her toolkit. He saw the way Glitch's malfunctioning eye kept twitching towards the darkened entrance of a side passage, a potential escape route she couldn't reach. His analytical mind began to race, unbidden, calculating angles, timing, weaknesses. Breaker's hydraulic arm is slow to pivot. Glitch's optic is clearly suffering from a cascade failure. His peripheral vision is shot. Sawtooth is the main threat, but his jaw mod is arcing, a sign of a leaky power cell. He saw it all, but his body remained frozen, paralyzed by the fresh, raw memory of the dead runner. He was nothing but an observer, a coward. Then Sawtooth reached for her, and something inside Izuku snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a primal, undeniable impulse that bypassed every logical argument for self-preservation. His brain was screaming at him. His body moved on its own. His hand shot out, not for the power switch, but for a small, dented sphere sitting on a shelf labeled volatile salvage. It was the casing of a military-grade EMP grenade he'd found in a dumpster behind a corporate security barracks. He had painstakingly deactivated and rebuilt it, replacing the military-grade power source with a less stable, but functional, scavenged one. He'd never tested it. He had no idea if it would produce a clean, disabling pulse or simply explode. He didn't care. His door hissed open. The three gangers and the woman all turned, startled by the sudden noise. For a split second, all eyes were on him, a skinny, terrified kid in a grease-stained jacket, standing half-hidden in a dark doorway. Sawtooth's sparking jaw twisted into a sneer. "Well, look what we got here. A little fleshy wants to watch the show." Izuku's heart was a jackhammer against his ribs. His throat was dry. But his arm, acting on some deep, forgotten instinct, was already in motion. With a desperate cry that was more of a squeak, he threw the grenade. It wasn't a good throw. It wobbled through the air and landed with a pathetic clatter on the wet floor, right in the middle of the three gangers. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Breaker let out a stupid, booming laugh. "The fleshy threw a rock at us." Then the grenade pulsed. There was no sound, no explosion. Just a silent, invisible wave of energy that washed through the corridor. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The flickering ramen sign went dark. The neon koi fish swimming through the air dissolved into static. For the three members of the Scrappers, it was as if their souls had been short-circuited. Sawtooth's jaw mod gave a final, violent arc of blue electricity and then froze, half open, a stream of drool trickling from his lip. Glitch screamed as his optical implant went from a frantic flicker to a burst of white-hot light, and he staggered back, clutching his face, temporarily blinded. Breaker's hydraulic arm seized up with a loud groan of protesting metal, locking in a useless, half-raised position. All their cheap, pearly shielded chrome went dead. The corridor was plunged into a surreal silence, broken only by Glitch's pained whimpers. The woman stared, her eyes wide with shock, first at the incapacitated gangers, then at Izuku. Izuku found his voice, a strangled, panicked yell. "Run! Go! Now!" The spell was broken. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled past the stunned gangers and sprinted down the corridor, disappearing into the market's maze. Izuku felt a dizzying, momentary surge of triumph. It worked. He actually did something. The triumph lasted for approximately 3 seconds. Breaker, roaring in frustration, swung his entire body around, using the momentum of his locked arm like a club. The massive, rusty fist smashed into the wall right where Izuku's head had been a moment before, pulverizing the ferro-concrete and sending a shower of dust and sparks into the air. Izuku stumbled back into his workshop, his heart trying to claw its way out of his chest. The EMP's effect was already fading. Sawtooth was shaking his head, his jaw beginning to grind and spark back to life. Glitch, though still blinded in one eye, was pulling a wicked-looking vibro-knife from his belt with his organic hand. He had created an opening, but he hadn't won. He'd only made them angry. And now, he was the target. "I'm gonna rip your skin off and use it to polish my boot, you little flesh rat!" Sawtooth snarled, his voice distorted as his augment rebooted. Izuku slammed his door shut, fumbling with the manual lock. A heavy, metallic thud shook the entire frame as Breaker slammed his arm against it. The lock, designed to keep out petty thieves, not enraged cyborgs, groaned in protest. He scrambled backwards, his eyes darting around his workshop, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. But his workshop was a dead end. There was no back door. He was trapped. Another boom rattled the door. A long, horizontal crack appeared in the reinforced metal. This was it. This was his slipstream moment. He had played the hero for 5 seconds, and now he was going to die for it. The irony was so bitter it made him want to vomit. He grabbed the heaviest thing on his workbench, a solid-state power converter, and held it in front of him like a shield. It was useless, and he knew it. With a final, deafening shriek of tearing metal, the door was ripped from its hinges and thrown across the room, crashing into a shelf of spare parts. Sawtooth, Glitch, and Breaker stood in the ruined doorway, their forms silhouetted against the dim light of the corridor. Their cheap chrome was flickering back to life, casting twitching, monstrous shadows on the walls. "Nowhere to run, fleshy!" Sawtooth growled, taking a step inside. Izuku's life didn't flash before his eyes. All he could think was, "I'm sorry, Mom. I was a fool." He braced himself for the end. And then, a new sound cut through the tension. It was a cough. A dry, hacking, wet-sounding cough coming from the corridor behind the gangers. It was a pathetic sound, the kind of noise an old, dying man makes in the final stages of consumption. The 3 gangers turned, annoyed by the interruption. Leaning against the far wall of the corridor, half hidden in the shadows, was a man. But man felt like too generous a term. He was a scarecrow, a skeleton held together by sheer willpower. He was impossibly tall and thin, his frame lost inside a stained, ragged trench coat that might have been beige a century ago. His face was a cavern of shadows, with 2 sunken eyes that seemed to burn with a feverish intensity. His blonde hair was thin and lank, hanging in 2 distinct, antenna-like tufts over his forehead. He looked like the city had chewed him up and spat him out years ago. Glitch scoffed. "Get lost, old man. This ain't your business." The skeletal man coughed again, a rattling spasm that shook his entire body. He wiped his mouth with the back of a bony hand. "Can a man enjoy the evening ambience without you lot making such a racket?" he wheezed, his voice thin and reedy. Sawtooth grinned, revealing his sparking, metallic teeth. "Looks like we got 2 fleshies for the price of 1. This is your lucky day, old-timer. We're gonna take that coat. And your shoes. And maybe your kidneys." The old man sighed, a long, weary sound. He pushed himself off the wall, and for the first time, Izuku saw him clearly. He seemed to shrink even further, his shoulders hunched. He looked utterly defeated, like just standing was a monumental effort. And then he moved. It wasn't a run. It wasn't a leap. It was a flicker, a glitch in reality. One moment, the skeletal man was standing 10 feet away, a pathetic, wheezing figure. The next, he was directly in front of Sawtooth, his movement so fast it didn't seem to occupy the space between the 2 points. The air popped, as if displaced by a phantom. Sawtooth's eyes widened in shock. He didn't even have time to raise his arms. The old man's hand, looking as fragile as a collection of twigs, shot out. It wasn't a punch. It was a simple, precise tap. His index finger connected with the side of Sawtooth's jaw, right on the leaky power cell Izuku had identified. There was a sharp zzz crack of electricity. Sawtooth's head whipped to the side, and his eyes rolled back in his head. He crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, his chrome completely dead. Glitch and Breaker stared, their processors struggling to catch up with what had just happened. "What the?" Glitch started to say, raising his vibroknife. The old man was no longer there. He was now behind Glitch. Another impossible, instantaneous movement. He didn't even look at him. He simply raised his foot in a short, sharp kick, connecting with the back of Glitch's knee. The joint, a cheap organic synthetic hybrid, buckled with a wet, snapping sound. Glitch screamed and fell, clutching his ruined leg. That left Breaker. The hulking brute roared in a mixture of fear and rage, swinging his massive, piston-driven arm in a wide, decapitating arc. The attack was slow, powerful, and predictable. The old man didn't dodge. He simply dropped to one knee, the blow sailing harmlessly over his head. As he came back up, his hand darted out and slapped something onto the main hydraulic piston of Breaker's arm. It was a small, magnetic disc that Izuku recognized as a diagnostic scanner. The disc flared with a bright blue light. Breaker's arm went haywire. The hydraulics hissed and screamed, forcing the limb to extend and retract in a series of violent, uncontrollable spasms. The brute was thrown off balance, stumbling around and smashing his own fist into the walls, unable to stop it. Finally, with one last, violent overextension, the main piston ruptured, spraying hot, stinking fluid all over the corridor. The arm went limp, a dead weight. Breaker stared at it, his face a mask of disbelief, before the old man delivered a swift, efficient chop to the back of his neck, sending him crashing face first to the floor. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The corridor was silent again, save for the hum of a ventilation fan and the pained groans of the defeated gangers. The skeletal man stood amidst the carnage, his back to Izuku. His whole body was trembling. He leaned a hand against the wall to support himself, his shoulders heaving with ragged, desperate breaths. A cloud of steam, impossibly thick and white, vented from the collar of his trench coat, as if he were a malfunctioning steam engine. Then Izuku saw it. Through a gap in the back of the coat, a section of the man's shirt was visible. And on that shirt, a small, circular port set into his chest flashed with a brilliant, pulsing red light. It was a critical error warning. A system overload. This impossible burst of speed and strength hadn't been without a cost. It had nearly killed him. Slowly, painfully, the man turned. His sunken eyes found Izuku, who was still standing frozen in the ruined doorway of his workshop, clutching the power converter like a useless talisman. The man's gaze was sharp, analytical, and utterly weary. He looked at the dented EMP grenade on the floor, at the beaten gangers, and finally at Izuku's wide, terrified eyes. "You're a fleshy," the man stated, his voice a low, raspy wheeze. It wasn't an insult. It was a simple observation. No chrome, no combat augs. Not even a data jack. He took a shaky step forward, his tall frame casting a long, skeletal shadow. That was a foolish, reckless, and monumentally stupid thing to do. You should be dead. Izuku couldn't find his voice. He could only nod, his entire body shaking. So why did you do it? The man asked, his voice cutting through Izuku's fear. You saw them. You saw what they were. Why throw your life away for a stranger? The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. Izuku's mind raced, trying to formulate a logical response. Because she was in danger. Because no one else would help. Because it was the right thing to do. All the answers sounded trite, like lines from the heroic fictions he just abandoned. But when he finally spoke, the words that came out were the simple, unvarnished truth. They were pulled from the deepest, most fundamental part of his being, the part that had moved his arm when his brain had screamed in protest. I don't know, he stammered, his voice trembling. He looked down at his own empty, shaking hands. My body, it just moved on its own. I saw her face, she looked scared. I couldn't just stand there and watch. He looked up, meeting the old man's intense gaze, and the rest came out in a rush of shame and desperation. It's what a hero would do, isn't it? Even if it's stupid, even if you're weak, you're supposed to try. You have to, the words echoed in the small corridor. The declaration of a creed he no longer thought he believed in. The old man stared at him, his expression unreadable. The burning intensity in his eyes seemed to soften, replaced by something else. A flicker of surprise. Of disbelief. And then, something that looked almost like recognition. He had seen Izuku's analysis of the situation. The quick, tactical deployment of the EMP. The selfless move to protect a stranger. The utter, foolish, and absolute recklessness of it all. He had seen a spirit he thought had died out long ago, snuffed out by the corporate neon and the acid rain. The same spirit that had once driven him. A slow, sad smile touched the old man's thin lips. It was a ghost of a smile, but it transformed his skeletal face, hinting at a power and charisma that lay dormant beneath the broken surface. The red light on his chest finally faded, replaced by a steady, weak amber glow. His breathing evened out, though it still sounded ragged. He took another step forward, closing the distance between them. He stopped right in front of Izuku, looking down at the boy who was half his height and probably a third of his weight. "You've got the heart of a hero, kid," the man wheezed, the words sounding both like a compliment and a death sentence. "In this city, that's more of a curse than a gift." He extended a bony, trembling hand. It seemed like a monumental effort. "But maybe, just maybe, it's what this world needs." Izuku stared at the offered hand, then back at the man's face. The impossible speed, the precise takedowns, the hint of a forgotten charisma, the two iconic tufts of blonde hair. His mind, his analytical, pattern-recognizing mind, started connecting dots he never dared to connect before. It was impossible. It was ludicrous. It was a ghost story, but the ghost was standing right in front of him. "My name is Toshinori Yagi," the man said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Come with me. There's something I need to show you." Izuku looked from the skeletal man, Toshinori, to the ruined doorway of his workshop, the tomb of his dead dreams. He looked at the unconscious gangers, the evidence of his own foolish bravery and this stranger's impossible power. His dream wasn't dead. It had just been executed in an alleyway, and now its ghost had come back to haunt him. Hesitantly, his hand still shaking, Izuku Midoriya reached out and took the stranger's hand. The grip was surprisingly firm, a flicker of steel beneath the fragile bone. It was the first step out of the gutter, a step into a world far more dangerous and complex than he could ever have imagined. And as he followed the gaunt figure into the labyrinth of the Undercity, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just met a god, just as that god was beginning to die. The skeletal man, Toshinori Yagi, led Izuku away from the scene of the brief, brutal fight. He didn't take the main thoroughfares of the market, which were already beginning to stir with the first signs of morbid curiosity. Instead, he slipped into a side passage so narrow that Izuku had to turn sideways to follow, a space between two towering tenement blocks that smelled of mildew and stagnant water. It was the beginning of a journey into the city's forgotten circulatory system. They descended, spiraling down rusted maintenance ladders and navigating catwalks that groaned under their weight, suspended over abyssal chasms filled with the thunderous hum of the city's geothermal converters. The air grew colder, heavier, tasting of ozone and chilled, recycled air. The omnipresent glow of the upper city faded, replaced by the intermittent flicker of emergency lighting and the dull red glow of warning signs written in a dialect of code so ancient Izuku could barely parse it. Izuku's mind, still reeling from the whiplash of abject terror and bewildered awe, struggled to keep up. He was a cartographer of the Undercity's known regions, but this was uncharted territory, the deep infrastructure that most citizens never saw. It was the city's subconscious. He watched the man in front of him. Toshinori moved with a strange, shambling grace, his long limbs eating up the distance. Despite his wheezing and the occasional pause to lean against a conduit-covered wall, he never seemed lost. He moved like a ghost haunting the passages of his own tomb. Izuku's analytical brain, now rebooting from its earlier paralysis, began to catalog observations. Subject name, Toshinori Yagi. Physical state, critically malnourished, evidence of severe internal trauma. Combat analysis, utilizes a form of hypervelocity movement, seemingly instantaneous, no discernible cybernetic thrusters or grav repulses. Takedowns were not based on brute force, but on precise, targeted strikes against technological and biological weak points. The energy expenditure is catastrophic, resulting in systemic overload. He was so lost in his mental analysis that he almost walked straight into Tashinori's back when the man stopped abruptly before a wall of solid, corrosion-stained steel. It looked like a dead end. "We're here," Tashinori rasped, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. He placed a bony hand on a specific, unmarked panel on the wall. There was a soft click, and a scanner beam, thin and green, shot out, mapping his palm, then his retina. An synthesized voice, ancient and staticky, crackled from a hidden speaker. "Biometric signature. Yagi Tashinori. Recognized. User 7. No. User 8. Welcome." With a deep, grinding groan that sounded like a titan waking from a long slumber, a section of the wall receded, revealing a dark, cavernous space beyond. A wave of cold, sterile air washed over them, carrying the scent of dust, dormant electronics, and something that reminded Izuku of the inside of an ancient computer tower. Tashinori beckoned him forward. "Don't touch anything. Most of it is temperamental." Izuku stepped inside, and his breath caught in his throat. He was standing in a graveyard. A graveyard for gods of data. The space was immense, a cathedral of forgotten technology. Monolithic server towers, each the size of a small hab block, rose up into the darkness like black tombstones. Thick bundles of fiber-optic cables, some as thick as his arm, hung from the ceiling like dead vines, their surfaces coated in a thick layer of gray dust. The only light came from thousands of tiny, pinprick status indicators on the servers themselves, reds, ambers, and a few lonely, pulsing greens, blinking in a silent, forgotten language. It was a pre-Omnicorp server farm, from a time when the net was a decentralized wilderness, not the corporate-owned walled garden it was today. It was a digital ghost town. In the center of the cavern, a small space had been cleared. A simple cot was pushed against the base of one of the server monoliths. Next to it was a scarred metal desk supporting a complex and archaic-looking computer terminal, its screen glowing with streams of emerald green code. An assortment of medical diagnostic tools, empty nutrient paste tubes, and blood-stained rags were scattered across its surface. This was Tashinori's den. His safe house. What is this place?" Izuku whispered, his voice sounding small in the vast, humming silence. "A relic," Tashinori said, shuffling over to the desk and slumping into a worn-out chair. "One of the old net hubs. Omnicorp thinks they decommissioned and wiped all of these a generation ago. They missed one." He gestured vaguely at the blinking towers. "It's off their grid. Doesn't officially exist. The perfect place for a ghost to hide." He coughed, a deep, rattling sound that seemed to shake his entire frame, and he dabbed his mouth with a cloth. When he pulled it away, Izuku saw a dark stain of red. Not blood. It was too dark, too viscous, biocoolant. A leak in his internal systems. You're hurt," Izuku said, the words stating the obvious. Tashinori gave a humorless chuckle. "Hurt is a gentle way of putting it, my boy." He looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes seeming to peer right through him. "You're wondering who I am, how I did what I did back there. You've got a good mind. I can see the gears turning behind your eyes. You've been running the calculations." Izuku flushed, embarrassed. I was just..." "It's alright," Tashinori interrupted. "It's what you do. You analyze. You deconstruct. You search for the logic in things." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "But some things defy simple logic." He reached up to his neck, his fingers finding a nearly invisible seam behind his ear. He pressed it. The effect was instantaneous and utterly world-shattering. A low-frequency hum emanated from Tashinori's body, the sound of immense power being drawn from a hidden source. A network of fine, golden lines lit up beneath his skin, tracing paths of energy across his gaunt face and down his neck. There was a hiss, like the release of a high-pressure pneumatic system, and then he began to change. The air around him seemed to crackle. His skeletal frame filled out at an impossible rate. His hunched shoulders broadened, his sunken chest expanded. Muscle fibers, seemingly woven from hard light and memory, materialized from nowhere, packing onto his bones. He grew, not just in size, but in presence. The pathetic, wheezing man was consumed, replaced by a titan. He stood up, now easily 7 feet tall, a mountain of perfectly sculpted muscle. His face was no longer a shadowy cavern, but a chiseled, heroic visage, with a smile so bright and confident it seemed to generate its own light source. The 2 lank tufts of blonde hair now stood proudly, like the horns of a great beast, framing his face. He was clad in a form-fitting suit of red, white, and blue polymers that had seemingly materialized with his transformation. He looked exactly like the figure from the holographic data fragments. He looked like a god. "I am here," he boomed, and the voice was not the reedy wheeze of Tashinori Yagi. It was a deep, resonant thunder that vibrated in Izuku's very bones. It was the voice from the corrupted audio logs, the voice of a legend. Izuku's mind simply broke. The carefully constructed walls of logic and probability that he lived behind crumbled to dust. The power converter he was still inexplicably clutching slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. His jaw hung open. 1,000 fragmented analyses, a lifetime of obsessive research, all coalesced into a single, impossible, glorious truth. All might, he breathed, the name a prayer on his lips. The giant of a man placed his hands on his hips, his smile somehow growing even wider. "In the flesh! Or, well, flesh and a considerable amount of proprietary biomechanical scaffolding," he laughed. Izuku's brain went into overdrive, spewing out a lifetime of pent-up analysis and adoration. "You're real! I knew it!" The Takamatsu Skybridge incident. The energy signatures were inconsistent with any known corporate or military-grade hardware. I theorized it was a bioelectric amplification, but the power scaling was exponential, not linear, and your final appearance at the Omnicorp Tower. The structural damage indicated a focused kinetic force far exceeding a standard piledriver augment, and there were no scorch marks which ruled out plasma or explosive-based weaponry, which means, he was babbling, a torrent of technical jargon and fanboyish glee pouring out of him uncontrollably. He would have gone on for an hour, but he was cut short as All Might suddenly deflated. The transformation reversed itself with terrifying speed. With a loud, wet hiss, like a punctured tire, the muscle mass seemed to evaporate. The light beneath his skin died. The heroic figure dissolved, and in his place, the skeletal, wheezing form of Tashinori Yagi reappeared, slumping back into his chair. A massive cloud of steam erupted from his mouth and the collar of his coat, and he was seized by a violent, body-racking coughing fit that left him trembling and gasping for air. "Apologies," he choked out, wiping another smear of dark coolant from his lips. "The old engine doesn't hold a charge like it used to. 3 minutes. That's about all I can manage these days." The whiplash was too much for Izuku. He simply stood there, his mind a silent, screaming vortex of confusion. With a grunt of effort, Tashinori lifted his shirt. Izuku had seen horrific injuries before. Mangled chrome, plasma burns, limbs severed by industrial accidents. But what he saw on Tashinori's torso was a nightmare. Covering the entire left side of his abdomen was a grotesque, swirling vortex of scarred flesh and shattered metal. It was as if a miniature black hole had opened up inside him, twisting and crushing everything it touched. Ruined organs, now replaced with crudely integrated life support machinery, were visible through a semi-translucent membrane. Wires and coolant tubes snaked through the mangled tissue, pulsing with a weak, sickly light. At the center of the wound, his biopower core, the device that powered his transformation, flickered erratically. It was a miracle the man was even alive. 5 years ago, Tashinori said, his voice quiet and heavy with memory. A fight with an enemy I couldn't afford to lose against. He was a ghost, a legend even among the corporate elite. The CEO of Omnicorp, a man who goes by the name All for One. The name dropped into the silence of the server farm like a stone into a deep, dark well. Izuku knew the name. Everyone knew the name. All for One was a myth, a boogeyman, the invisible king on the corporate throne, rumored to be the most powerful man in the world, a figure who had never once been seen in public. His personal project, Tashinori continued, his eyes distant, was a series of abominations he called the Noma Protocol. He used illegal quark gene splicing, black market combat chrome, and forbidden neuroprogramming to create living weapons. They were monsters, designed for one purpose, to kill me. The one I fought that day, it was his masterpiece. He tapped a finger against the edge of the horrific wound. It had multiple abilities. Shock absorption, hyper-regeneration, super strength. I had to hit it with more power than I had ever used before. A single punch, with everything I had. It tore this hole in me. I destroyed my own body to put that monster down. He let his shirt fall. I won the battle. But I lost the war. My respiratory system was shredded, my digestive tract mostly destroyed. I've had half a dozen surgeries just to keep me upright. The hero known as All Might was effectively dead on that day. Now, all that's left is a ghost, running on borrowed time. Izuku stared, his earlier fanboyish excitement replaced by a profound, somber respect. This man had sacrificed everything. He was the proof that Izuku's dream was real, but he was also the proof of its terrible, terrible cost. But your power, Izuku finally managed to ask. It's not a quirk. It's not just Chrome. I've run every simulation. It defies physics. What is it? Toshinori leaned forward, his elbows on his cluttered desk, his gaze locking with Izuku's. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, charged with the weight of a secret kept for generations. You're right, kid. It's either. He tapped a key on his archaic terminal. The screen flickered, and a single, elegant string of code appeared, glowing brightly against the dark background. It was complex, self-referential, and seemed to subtly shift and rewrite itself as Izuku watched. It felt alive. What you're looking at, Toshinori said, his voice barely a whisper, is the most powerful, most sought after, and most dangerous piece of software ever written. We call it One for All. Izuku stared at the code, mesmerized. One for all? It's not hardware, my boy. It's a legacy. A unique, self-evolving legacy operating system. A ghost program that is passed from one user to the next, growing stronger with each transfer. It was created a century ago, back when the corporations first began their ascent, as a weapon of resistance. A way for a single person to fight back against an army, he explained, his voice taking on the tone of a historian reciting a sacred text. One for All wasn't installed on a hard drive. It was installed directly onto a person's nervous system, rewriting their biology at a quantum level. It allowed the user to interface with their own body as if it were a high-performance machine, to overclock their muscles, their neurons, their very cells, pushing them far beyond their natural limits. It could also interface with and supercharge any cybernetics the user had installed, making them exponentially more powerful. It is the ultimate fusion of the organic and the synthetic, Toshinori said. A power that can be passed on. A torch of hope, carried through the darkest times. He looked at his own skeletal hands. I am the 8th user to bear this power. And for years I have searched for a worthy successor. Someone with the spirit, the drive, the unbreakable will to carry the torch after I'm gone. He fell silent, and looked directly at Izuku. His gaze was heavy, filled with a desperate, terrifying hope. The implication hit Izuku with the force of a physical blow. His knees felt weak. Me? He squeaked, his voice cracking. No. No, you can't. I'm a fleshy. I'm a Deku. I have no chrome, no training, no power. You saw me back there, I just froze. I'm a coward. I'm nothing. I saw a boy with no hope of victory, with no personal stake in the fight, throw himself into danger to save a stranger. Toshinori countered, his voice firm, cutting through Izuku's self-deprecation. I saw a mind that could analyze a threat and deploy a tactical solution in a split second. I didn't see a coward. I saw a hero, screaming to be let out. He stood up, the effort making him wince. One for All is a sacred trust. It chooses its user as much as the user chooses it. And when I saw you act, without a thought for your own safety, I felt it. The embers of the old users, the ghosts in this machine, they stirred. They saw what I saw. He held out his hand, palm up. I am offering you my power, Izuku Midoriya. I am offering you the chance to make your dream a reality. The chance to become a hero. Izuku's world tilted on its axis. Everything he had ever wanted, the impossible, childish fantasy he had just renounced, was being handed to him by his idol. It was a dream come true, but his analytical mind, his greatest asset and his cruelest tormentor, saw the flaw. The fatal error in the logic. But you said it supercharges Chrome, Izuku said, his voice trembling. It interfaces with cybernetics. What happens when you install it? On someone with nothing? On pure flesh and bone? Toshinori's expression became grim. The hope in his eyes was tempered by a stark, brutal honesty. The OS doesn't differentiate between hardware. To it, your organic body is just the machine it's running on. A normal, unmodified human body is not built to handle this kind of power. The raw output, even at a fraction of its potential, it would be catastrophic. He didn't sugarcoat it. The first time you tried to use it to throw a punch, it would turn the bones in your arm to powder. The force would cause your muscles to tear themselves from your skeleton. It would, in all likelihood, kill you. The dream, so bright and beautiful just a moment before, was now revealed to have a razor's edge. It wasn't a gift. It was a loaded gun, pointed at his own head. So this is my choice? Izuku asked, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Stay a useless, powerless Deku for the rest of my life, or accept a power that will tear me apart from the inside out. That is the choice. Toshinori confirmed, his voice soft but unyielding. I cannot lie to you, my boy. The path I am offering is one of immense pain and sacrifice. You would have to train your body to an inhuman degree, just to make it a vessel that won't shatter. It may take years before you can use even a fraction of this power safely. It would be easier, safer, to refuse. To walk away, and live your life. He looked at Izuku, his gaze filled with a profound empathy. He knew the weight of the burden he was offering. Izuku looked down at his own hands. Soft, callous from delicate work, but ultimately weak. Flesh and bone. He thought of Bakugo's sneer. You're either chrome, or you're scrap. He thought of the dead runner in the alley, another victim of a system that crushed anyone who dared to stand up. He thought of the fear on the woman's face, and the brief, exhilarating, terrifying moment when he had done something, anything, to help. To walk away meant accepting that world. A world where the strong preyed on the weak, where hope was a commodity, and where heroes died in gutters. To accept meant facing a pain he could barely comprehend, for a chance, a sliver of a chance, to change it. The despair that had consumed him after seeing Slipstream's death, the certainty that his dream was a lie, had been a lie itself. The dream wasn't dead. It was just waiting for him to be brave enough to pay its price. He looked up at Toshinori, at the dying god offering him a spark of his fire. There were tears streaming down Izuku's face, but for the first time in a long time, they were not tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of pure, unadulterated resolve. I accept, he said, his voice cracking but firm. He didn't hesitate. He didn't waver. In that moment, all the analysis, all the fear, all the self-doubt, was burned away by the simple, incandescent certainty of his choice. Toshinori's weary face broke into a genuine, relieved smile. I knew you would, he said softly. I knew it. He then walked over to a small, refrigerated container and pulled out a single strand of his blonde hair. He held it out to Izuku. Izuku stared at it, confused. What? The OS is bound to my biocode, Toshinori explained, a slightly embarrassed look on his face. To initiate the primary transfer, the new user must, ingest a piece of the current user's DNA, to create a handshake between the two systems. He coughed. So, eat this. Izuku's profound, world-changing moment was immediately undercut by the sheer, awkward weirdness of it all. He stared at the hair, then back at his idol's expectant face. After everything he had just been through, this was somehow the most bizarre part. With a deep breath and a silent prayer that this wasn't some kind of elaborate, fever dream prank, he took the strand of hair and swallowed it. It tasted like nothing. Right then, Toshinori said, clapping his hands together with a bit of his old energy. Now for the hard part. He led Izuku to the archaic terminal. Dangling from it by a thick, shielded cable was a single, wicked-looking data spike, the kind used for direct neural interfacing. The hair just primes the system, Toshinori explained, his voice grim again. This is the main data dump. I'm going to have to jack you in and transfer the core OS directly into your brain stem. It will be unpleasant. How unpleasant? Izuku asked, his newfound resolve wavering slightly as he looked at the sharp, gleaming point of the spike. Imagine every piece of data on every one of these servers being force-fed directly into your soul through a fire hose. Tashinori said, not a hint of exaggeration in his voice. It will rewrite your nervous system. It will feel like you are being unmade and rebuilt, one line of code at a time. Izuku took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had made his choice. He wouldn't back down now. He sat in the chair, the worn synth leather cool against his back, and tilted his head, exposing the data port socket all citizens had at the base of their skull. He had never used his. It was a virgin port. Do it, he said, his voice a whisper. Tashinori gave him a solemn, proud nod. He picked up the data spike. This is the first day of your new life, Izuku Midoriya. Try not to scream too loud. It echoes in here. He inserted the spike. Izuku's world ended. It wasn't pain. Pain was a limited, organic concept. This was a deluge. A tidal wave of pure, raw information crashed through the floodgates of his consciousness. Green code filled his vision, a waterfall of glowing symbols that were not letters or numbers but concepts: strength, speed, hope, rage, despair. His own memories were ripped apart and scattered, mingling with fragmented images that weren't his. He saw a woman with a kind smile and floating hair, her hand outstretched. He saw a man in a tactical mask, leaping between buildings. He saw glimpses of 7 other lives, 7 other battles, 7 other deaths. The ghosts in the machine rose up to greet him, their voices a cacophony in his mind. He felt the OS sink its tendrils into his spine, into his neurons, into his very DNA. It was an invasion, a violation, a reprogramming of his fundamental being. His body began to convulse violently in the chair, his muscles seizing and releasing as they fought against the foreign code. A scream, raw and inhuman, was torn from his throat, echoing through the vast, silent server farm. The last thing he saw before his consciousness shattered completely was a single line of text, burning itself into his mind against the torrent of green code. One for all OS. Installation initiated. Welcome to the legacy, 9th user. Awareness returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a system-wide error message screamed in every nerve. The first thing Izuku registered was pain. It was a deep, fundamental ache, a thrumming agony that felt as if his very cells were vibrating at an agonizingly wrong frequency. His body was a machine that had been taken apart and put back together by a blind, malicious mechanic. Every joint was a nexus of fire, every muscle a frayed wire carrying a current of pure misery. He tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids felt as heavy as lead shutters. A low, continuous hum filled his ears, the sound of the ancient servers that surrounded him, their eternal data psalms a constant in the cold, still air. The scent of ozone and sterile antiseptic clung to the back of his throat. A groan escaped his lips, a sound more animal than human. Easy, my boy. Easy. The voice was a familiar, reedy wheeze. Tashinori. A cool, damp cloth was gently placed on his forehead, offering a small, fleeting island of relief in an ocean of pain. Don't try to move. With a monumental effort that felt like lifting a fallen skyscraper, Izuku forced his eyes open. The world was a blurry smear of blinking server lights. He was lying on the cot in the center of the server farm, a thin, scratchy blanket pulled up to his chin. Tashinori's gaunt, shadowed face swam into focus above him. The man looked even more exhausted than before, if such a thing were possible. Dark circles under his eyes were like bruises, and his skin had a pale, waxy sheen. What? Izuku's voice was a dry, cracking whisper. His throat felt like it was coated in sand. You've been unconscious for 3 days, Tashinori said, helping him take a tentative sip of water from a canteen. The cool liquid was agony on his raw throat, but it was also life. Your body fought the OS installation every step of the way. A fever that would have cooked a normal man's brain, muscle spasms so violent I had to strap you down to keep you from tearing your own tendons. Your system was trying to reject a foreign entity. But it finally took. He managed a weak, tired smile. The handshake is complete. One for all is now a part of you. Izuku processed this. 3 days. Lost to a fugue state of pain and reprogramming. He tried to take stock of his own body. The agonizing ache was still there, but underneath it, he could feel something else, a new and alien sensation. It was like a background process, a low-level hum of immense potential energy running just beneath his consciousness. It was a sleeping giant, coiled in the base of his spine. I can feel it, Izuku breathed, his eyes wide. Toshinori nodded grimly. It can feel you, too. It's now woven into your DNA, your nervous system. You and the OS are one. A surge of desperate, reckless energy cut through Izuku's pain. He had done it. He had survived. The power was his. The dream was within reach. He had to know. He had to see. Ignoring Toshinori's warning, he pushed himself into a sitting position. The world spun violently, and a wave of nausea washed over him, but he grit his teeth and pushed through it. He swung his legs over the side of the cot, his bare feet meeting the cold, concrete floor. He was weak, trembling, but he was on his feet. Kid, what are you doing? Your body needs to recover, Toshinori protested, rising to steady him. I have to try, Izuku said, his voice filled with a feverish intensity. He pushed Toshinori's hands away gently. I have to know if it was worth it. I have to. Toshinori saw the look in his eyes, the desperate need for validation after the hell he just endured, and he sighed, stepping back. He knew he couldn't stop him. All right. But be careful. It's not a muscle you can just flex. Think of it as a pipeline to a nuclear reactor. You don't just kick the door in. You open the valve, just a crack. Izuku nodded, his focus narrowing. He shuffled to a small, cleared space between two server towers, the monolithic machines standing like silent, indifferent witnesses. He took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm the frantic hammering of his heart. He closed his eyes and reached inward, searching for that new, humming presence. He found it easily. It was a vast, silent ocean of power, waiting for a command. Open the valve. Just a crack. He remembered Toshinori's warning about the power being too much for his body. He had to be smart. He had to be controlled. Just a little bit, he thought. A small percentage. 5%. Just 5%. It was his first mistake. He didn't think in terms of a gentle flow. He thought in terms of a number, a quantity. He mentally issued the command, output, 5%. Target, right arm. The response was not a trickle. It was a flash flood. A scream of raw, untamed energy erupted from his core and surged down his arm. A network of brilliant, emerald green lines, like living circuitry, blazed to life across his skin, illuminating the dark space with their terrifying light. The air around him crackled with ozone. The hum of the server seemed to spike in pitch, as if reacting to the sudden, violent power surge. For a nanosecond, he felt a power unlike anything he could have imagined. It was the power to shatter mountains, to boil oceans. It was the power of a god. Then, his body, his frail, organic hardware gave way. The first sound was a series of sickeningly wet, sharp cracks, like a whole bundle of dry sticks being snapped at once. It was the sound of his radius and ulna, the bones in his forearm, shattering into a dozen pieces under the impossible strain. The second sound was his own scream, a high, thin wail of pure, white-hot agony as his arm bent backwards at an angle that defied all anatomy. The third sound was a concussive boom as the displaced air from his aborted movement erupted outwards. It wasn't a punch, he hadn't even had time to form a fist, it was just the raw, kinetic force of the energy being released. The shockwave slammed into the server tower next to him, leaving a fist-sized dent in the reinforced steel casing and causing a shower of sparks to rain down from a ruptured conduit overhead. The recoil was as devastating as the initial blast. The force traveled back through his body, lifting him off his feet and throwing him backwards. He landed hard, and the impact, combined with the systemic shock, caused his left leg to buckle and snap with another horrifying crunch. He lay on the floor, a broken, twitching heap, his mind a whiteout of blinding pain. His right arm was a ruined, useless appendage, bent into an obscene shape. His left leg was a landscape of agony. The green light of the OS flickered and died, leaving him in the merciful darkness, the smell of burned ozone and his own terror filling his lungs. Through the haze of pain, He saw Toshinori's face, a mask of grim, sorrowful confirmation. He hadn't looked surprised. He had looked like a man who had been expecting this all along. "Damn it, kid!" Toshinori was at his side in an instant, a fully stocked medkit already in his hands. He worked with a practiced, desperate efficiency, injecting a high-dose pain inhibitor into Izuku's neck. The white-hot agony receded to a roaring, manageable inferno. With a sickening series of clicks and snaps, he forced the broken bones in Izuku's leg back into a rough alignment, then clamped a state-of-the-art hydraulic brace around it. He was gentler with the arm, knowing the damage was far more severe. He stabilized it as best he could, his face a grimace of pity. "Bone-setting nanites," he explained, injecting a shimmering, silver fluid into the ruined limb. "They'll begin rebuilding the bone structure, but this is bad. You pulverized it." Izuku lay there, tears of pain and utter, soul-crushing failure streaming down his face. "I failed," he choked out, the words thick with despair. "I couldn't even handle a tiny bit. I'm too weak. You were wrong to choose me." "No," Toshinori said, his voice firm, cutting through the self-pity. He sat back on his haunches, wiping coolant and sweat from his brow. "I wasn't wrong to choose you. You were wrong in your approach." He pointed a bony finger at Izuku. "You are the problem. Your body. Your thinking." He stood and walked over to his archaic terminal. "Look at it this way, my boy. One for All is the most advanced, powerful piece of software in existence. A God-tier OS, your body," he said, gesturing to Izuku's broken form, "is a 10-year-old, consumer-grade motherboard with a faulty power supply and no cooling system. You just tried to run a reality-bending simulation on it. You're lucky you only blew a few capacitors instead of melting the whole rig down to slag." The analogy, couched in terms Izuku understood perfectly, cut through the pain. He had treated the power like a tool, when he should have been treating his body as the medium. "This power," Toshinori continued, his voice echoing in the server cathedral, "is not something you can just wield. It's something your body must be able to contain. You are the vessel, and right now you are a cracked, fragile glass. We need to reforge you. We need to turn you into a pressure-rated, reinforced steel container." Over the next few weeks, as the nanites slowly and agonizingly knitted his bones back together, Izuku's new life began. It was a life of pain, discipline, and relentless, grueling work. Toshinori's training regimen was unlike anything Izuku could have imagined. It wasn't about building bulky, showy muscles. It was about forging a body that could withstand a hurricane from the inside out. His days started before the first recycled light filtered down into the deepest levels of the Undercity. They began with Toshinori forcing him through hours of excruciating joint and tendon-strengthening exercises, pushing his limbs to their absolute limits, and then holding them there. He spent hours a day submerged in a tank of repurposed, chilled industrial coolant to reduce inflammation and promote micro-tissue repair. His diet was no longer cheap nutrient paste, but a carefully calibrated, foul-tasting sludge of high-density proteins, mineral supplements, and biopolymers that Toshinori procured from a black-market medical supplier. It was designed to increase his bone density and muscle fiber tensile strength. He ran for miles through the labyrinthine service tunnels, wearing a weighted vest filled with scavenged metal plates, until his lungs burned and his legs screamed for mercy. He hauled massive, defunct power cables from one end of the server farm to the other, his muscles tearing and rebuilding themselves, growing stronger, denser. Every night, he collapsed onto his cot, every inch of his body screaming in protest, only to be woken a few hours later by Toshinori to do it all over again. It was hell. But through it all, a change was happening. His thin, scrawny frame began to fill out. The soft, pale flesh of a boy who spent his life hunched over a workbench was replaced by the lean, tightly coiled muscle of a fighter. He was still far from a giant like All Might's powered form, but he was no longer a fragile glass. He was becoming solid. One day, after a particularly brutal training session, Toshinori sat him down. "The physical training is only half of it," the gaunt man said, looking grim. "Your hardware is getting stronger, but it will never be enough on its own. We need to give you a fighting chance. We need to upgrade the chassis." He slid a cred stick across the table. It was heavy, loaded with a sum of money that made Izuku's eyes widen. This is most of what I have left. The last of All Might's legacy. It's not enough for top-of-the-line military chrome, but it's enough for a foundation. Their destination was a back-alley clinic in the deepest, most lawless sector of the Naruhata district. The clinic was a repurposed shipping container, sterilized with UV light, and smelling faintly of bleach and desperation. The reproduct was a twitchy, wiry woman named Chio, whose face was a mask of wrinkles and whose eyes, magnified by a set of complex optical implants, missed nothing. She was, as Toshinori explained, the best in the business when it came to surgery that wasn't exactly corporation approved. She was recovery girl. The procedure was brutal. Strapped to a table under the harsh glare of a surgical lamp, Izuku felt the microdrills whine as they bored into his bones, the spider-like robotic arms weaving a lattice of carbon nanofiber and reinforced polymer around his skeleton. They installed a subdermal impact gel layer to help absorb shock, and reinforced the major joints in his arms and legs with micro-hydraulic actuators. It wasn't a full-body conversion. It wasn't flashy chrome. Most of it was invisible from the outside. But when he woke up, bruised, sore, and covered in surgical scars, he felt a new, fundamental solidity. He was no longer just a fleshy. He was augmented. The steel container was being built, but even that was not enough. Your body is now a reinforced weapon, Toshinori said a week later, once Izuku had recovered from the surgery. But you're still trying to fire it like a primitive club. The problem isn't just your hardware anymore, it's your user interface. You need to learn to control the software. This was the second part of his training. It was mental, not physical. Toshinori would have him sit for hours in the humming darkness of the server farm, in a state of deep meditation. Don't try to feel the power in your muscles, Toshinori instructed, his voice a low, hypnotic murmur. That's the analog way. One for all is digital. Close your eyes. Look inward. See the interface. At first, Izuku saw nothing but darkness. But slowly, painstakingly, he began to perceive it. It wasn't a neat graphical interface like a consumer-grade operating system. It was a place, a vast, dark, internal space lit by endless streams of cascading green code, a digital ocean of raw potential. It was the heart of One for All, and it wasn't empty. As he delved deeper, he began to perceive other presences within the code. They weren't people, not exactly. They were like massive, locked archive files, data clusters of immense size and complexity, each one radiating a faint, unique energy signature. They were the ghosts in the machine, the vestiges of the previous users. He tried to access one, a file that seemed to hum with a gentle, floating sensation. Archive_07_Nana_Shimura_locked. The moment his consciousness touched it, he was hit with a fragmented burst of sensory data that wasn't his own, the feeling of wind whipping past his face at incredible speed, the sound of a woman's determined laughter, the gut-wrenching grief of leaving a small child behind. It was too much. The feedback loop was too strong, and he was violently ejected from his meditative state, gasping for breath, the phantom emotions clinging to him like a shroud. They are not ready to talk to you yet, Toshinori explained, seeing the boy's distress. The OS is still integrating with your system. For now, they are just echoes, corrupted logs. In time, you may be able to access them. They hold the key to the true potential of One for All. But for now, just observe. Learn the layout of your own soul. Izuku spent weeks just navigating that internal space, learning to feel the ebbs and flows of the power without trying to command it. He learned to differentiate the thrumming energy of the core OS from the distinct signatures of the locked vestiges. He was mapping his inner world. The breakthrough came during a session that had stretched for nearly 8 hours. He was exhausted, his mind numb from the effort. You're still thinking about it all wrong. Toshinori's voice cut through his concentration. You tried to use 5% and shattered your arm. What you think of as 5% is a massive, uncontrolled data dump. You're trying to move a mountain when you only need to move a pebble. He knelt beside Izuku. Stop trying to punch with the power. A punch is a clumsy, analog action. You have a digital weapon. Think about it in terms of data transfer. Don't throw a rock. Fire a single, controlled packet of data. Isolate a tiny, tiny fraction of the whole. Not 5%. 1%. And don't send it to your whole arm. Send it to a single point. Your fingertip. A switch flipped in Izuku's mind. A data packet. It was a language he understood. He closed his eyes again, sinking back into the green ocean of his inner world. This time, he didn't try to grasp the ocean. He carefully, meticulously, used his will to scoop up a single drop. 1%. A tiny, almost infinitesimal amount of the whole. Then, he visualized the pathway. Not as muscles and bone, but as a fiber-optic cable running from his core, through his newly reinforced shoulder, down his augmented arm, and terminating at the very tip of his index finger. He didn't think punch. He thought execute. He brought his hand up in the real world. He focused all his intent, all his training, all of Toshinori's lessons, into that single point, and he flicked his finger. There was no earth-shattering boom. No devastating shockwave. There was just a sharp, clean snap, like a tiny sonic boom. A brilliant flicker of green light, no bigger than a firefly, erupted from his fingertip for a split second. A small, perfectly round hole, smoking at the edges, appeared in the metal floor plate an inch in front of him. The recoil was still there, a sharp, jarring shock that ran up his arm and made his teeth rattle. His fingers, even with the reinforced skeleton, were instantly bruised a dark purple, and a deep, resonant ache settled into his bones. But nothing was broken. Izuku stared at his trembling hand, then at the hole in the floor, his eyes wide. A hysterical, relieved laugh bubbled up out of his chest. He had done it. He had touched the lightning, and for the first time, he hadn't been burned. Tears of joy and relief streamed down his face as he looked up at his mentor. Toshinori was not smiling. He was looking at Izuku with an expression of profound, solemn pride. He had given this boy a curse, a burden that had broken his own body, and the boy had taken the first step towards mastering it. Good, All Might's ghost said, his voice soft but filled with the weight of generations. You've successfully booted up. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Izuku's shoulder. Now do it again. 1,000 times. Then 1,000 more. Izuku looked at his aching, bruised, but whole hand. The faint, green glow of the Legacy OS pulsed gently under his skin, a promise of the impossible power he now held. The system shock was over. The real work had just begun. The UA Runner Academy wasn't located in the gleaming corporate spires that pierced the smog-choked sky, nor was it hidden in the deepest, most desperate chasms of the Undercity. It occupied a strange, liminal space, a sprawling campus built on and into the colossal support structures of a decommissioned intercity maglev hub. It was a place between worlds, a gray zone in the city's rigid hierarchy, and that was entirely by design. From a distance, it looked like a fortress, a brutalist ziggurat of ferroconcrete and weathered steel, plastered with the faded logos of corporations long since collapsed or consumed. Up close, it was a chaotic hive of activity. Students in a motley collection of customized gear, scavenged armor, and personalized cybernetics moved with a confident energy that was rare in the Undercity. The air thrummed not with the oppressive hum of corporate drones, but with the whine of overclocked processors, the sizzle of welding torches from the tech labs, and the distant, concussive thump of explosions from the combat training zones. For Izuku, stepping onto the campus felt like docking at a mythical port after a long, terrifying voyage. For the past 8 months, his world had been the cold, humming darkness of the server farm, and his only companion had been the dying god who was his mentor. He had pushed his body and mind to their absolute limits, reforging himself in a crucible of pain and sheer, bloody-minded determination. His once scrawny frame now held a wiry, functional strength, every muscle a tightly coiled spring. His new endoskeleton had become a part of him, an inner strength that was both physical and psychological. He was no longer the fragile boy who had stumbled out of his workshop. He was something new. He had learned to contain the raging ocean of One for All. He still couldn't swim in it, not yet, but he could stand on the shore and draw a single bucket of water from its depths. His flicker smash, as he'd come to call it, was now a controlled, precise tool. He could fire off a small, focused burst of kinetic energy from his fingertips a dozen times before the bone-deep ache in his arm became too much. It was a pathetic fraction of All Might's power, but it was his. Nervous? Toshinori's voice, a familiar reedy wheeze, came from his side. The skeletal man was hunched in his worn trench coat, looking more like a concerned grandfather than a legendary hero. He had insisted on escorting Izuku to the entrance, a decision that made Izuku's cheeks burn with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. Terrified, Izuku admitted, clutching the strap of his worn messenger bag. It felt heavy on his shoulder, filled not with textbooks, but with diagnostic tools, spare power cells, and the detailed digital notebooks he still obsessively maintained. What if I'm not good enough? Everyone here, they look like they were born with chrome in their veins. Talent and tech are nothing without spirit, Toshinori said, placing a bony hand on his shoulder. You have more of that than anyone I've ever met. Remember the purpose of this place. UA isn't a corporate training ground. It's a sanctuary. It's run by Principal Nizu, an old ally of mine. He knows the truth about this city. He trains runners not to be mercenaries, but to be, well, to be what heroes were supposed to be. Agents of balance. He gave Izuku's shoulder a final squeeze. You belong here, my boy. Now go. Your legacy starts today. With a final, grateful nod, Izuku turned and walked through the massive, fortified gates of the academy, disappearing into the throng of new students. The orientation took place in a vast, cavernous hall that had once been the maglev station's main concourse. A massive, pixelated departures board still hung from the ceiling, now repurposed to display the academy's charter in glowing, green text. Standing on a podium at the front of the hall was a creature that defied easy categorization. It was a chimera, a bipedal being with the white fur, sensitive ears, and intelligent black eyes of what looked like a rat, or perhaps a stoat, or a bear, all flawlessly integrated into a small, humanoid form. He wore a finely tailored suit, and had a scar running over his right eye. This was Principal Nizu, a bioengineered prodigy with a superintelligence quirk, a survivor of a corporate research lab who now dedicated his life to undermining the very system that created him. His welcoming speech was a dizzying, rapid-fire deconstruction of corporate ethics, urban warfare tactics, and philosophical game theory. Izuku, with his analytical mind, was captivated. Most of the other students just looked bewildered. After the speech, the new students were herded towards their first major assessment, the entrance exam. Izuku found himself in a massive staging area, a concrete hangar bay filled with hundreds of nervous-looking teenagers. Each was assigned to a different simulated combat zone. It was here, amidst the anxious chatter and the hum of charging cybernetics, that he saw her again. She was standing a few yards away, stretching her arms. It was the young woman from the alleyway, the gravlift mechanic he had saved from the scrappers. Her round, kind face was set in a look of fierce determination. She wore a practical, form-fitting pilot's suit, and her fingertips were adorned with small, pink pads. The telltale sign of a zero-gravity quirk user, a rare mutation that allowed her to nullify the effects of gravity on anything she touched. Izuku's heart did a strange, stuttering leap in his chest. He had wondered what had happened to her. He had replayed that moment in the alley 1,000 times, the catalyst for his entire new life. He took a half-step forward, wanting to say something, anything, but the words died in his throat. What would he even say? Hi, I'm the terrified kid who almost got us both killed before a dying superhero saved me? Before he could decide, a loud, familiar, and utterly unwelcome voice cut through the air. Well, if it isn't the useless fleshy. Did you get lost on your way to the scrap heap? Izuku flinched as if struck. He turned. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, a predatory smirk on his face. He wasn't wearing the sleek corporate suit Izuku remembered. He was dressed in a high-tech, military-grade combat rig, his Detonarat blast gauntlets gleaming under the hangar lights. He radiated an aura of arrogant, explosive power. Keikaken, Izuku stammered, instinctively taking a step back. You're a student here? Don't be stupid, Deku. Bakugo sneered, looking him up and down with open contempt. UA is for street rats and idealists. I'm here as a corporate liaison. Detonarat sends me to scout for any talent worth poaching before they get stupid ideas about freedom. And to remind everyone what real, top-tier power looks like. He held up one of his gauntlets, and a small, controlled explosion popped harmlessly in his palm, a show of casual, intimidating force. But I never figured they'd let in actual, unmodified garbage. Did you bribe someone? Izuku's hands clenched into fists at his side. The old, familiar sting of Bakugo's insults was still there, but it was different now. It was layered over 8 months of brutal training and newfound purpose. The boy who would have withered under that glare was gone. I passed the written exams, same as everyone else, Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady. He met Bakugo's crimson glare without flinching. Bakugo's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, surprised by the flicker of defiance. But it was quickly replaced by an even more cutting derision. The written exams? Who gives a damn about that? This is a school for runners, Deku. Out there, he said, gesturing to the massive blast doors leading to the combat zones. Theory doesn't mean a thing. It's all about the chrome, the power, the results. Something a quirkless, useless fleshy like you wouldn't understand. Before Bakugo could continue his tirade, a third voice joined the conversation. Is there a problem here? A tall, well-built young man with dark blue hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of glasses strode towards them. His movements were precise and rigid, almost robotic. From the knees down, his legs were gleaming, high-performance cybernetics, designed for incredible speed. He wore the insignia of the Ida family, owners of the Ida 10 Corporation, a smaller, more ethical cybernetics company known for producing the best high-speed prosthetics on the market. My name is Tenya Ida, he announced, his voice a formal baritone. As a prospective student of this prestigious institution, I must insist you cease this public display of aggression. It is unbecoming of future heroes. Bakugo shot him a look of pure venom. Mind your own damn business, engine legs, before I decide to test your fireproofing. Ida bristled, his posture becoming even more rigid. Uncouth language is also. He was cut off by a klaxon that blared through the hangar, signaling the start of the exam. A massive holographic map appeared in the air, displaying the layout of the combat zone, a sprawling, derelict cityscape. Assessment start. A synthesized voice boomed. Objective: accumulate points by disabling mock villain drones. Drone values, 1, 2, and 3 points. Avoid the zero-pointer arena trap. The massive blast doors began to grind open. While everyone else was still processing the information, Bakugo was already moving. With a deafening roar from his gauntlets, he launched himself into the air, a human missile propelled by controlled explosions. Out of my way, extras! He yelled, disappearing into the simulated city. Ida, with a frustrated sigh at Bakugo's lack of decorum, activated his leg augments. With a low hum, he shot forward, a blue blur of motion. Good luck to you! He called back over his shoulder to Izuku. Suddenly Izuku was alone, left in the dust of their explosive departures. The crowd of students surged past him, a wave of activated chrome and determined shouts. For a terrifying moment, the old Deku resurfaced. He was out of his depth. He was too slow, too weak. He was going to fail. Then he felt it. The low, steady hum of one for all, a silent promise of power in his core. You belong here. Tashinori's words echoed in his mind. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists, and ran. The combat zone was a chaotic symphony of destruction. One-point drones, small, agile machines on spider-like legs, swarmed through the streets. 2-pointers were larger, bipedal bots with plasma cannons. 3-pointers were lumbering, heavily armored tank-like units. Students were everywhere, a whirlwind of unique abilities and tech. A girl with data jacks extending from her earlobes hacked into a drone's targeting system, making it fire on its allies. A boy with hardened skin simply shoulder-tackled a 2-pointer into a wall. Izuku, with no flashy powers, was at a disadvantage. He couldn't afford to get into a direct firefight. He had to be smarter. He fell back on his greatest strength, analysis. He ducked into an alleyway, pulling up the map of the area on his datapad. He watched the patterns of the drone patrols, the flow of the other students. He wasn't a frontline fighter. He was a strategist. He saw a group of 3 1-pointers cornering a student. Instead of charging in, Izuku climbed a fire escape, positioning himself above them. He took a deep breath, drew a tiny drop from the ocean of his power, and channeled it. 1%. Fingerdip. Flick. 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 3 sharp snaps echoed in the alley. 3 perfectly aimed kinetic bullets of compressed air. He didn't aim for the armored chassis. He aimed for the exposed optical sensors. 3 direct hits. The drone seized up, their single red eyes shattering, and collapsed into heaps of twitching metal. 3 points. A small, fierce grin touched Izuku's lips. It was working. He spent the next 10 minutes darting through the shadows, a ghost in the urban battlefield. He avoided direct confrontations, picking off drones from a distance with his precisely aimed flicker smashes. He analyzed their weak points, unshielded power cells, exposed actuator joints, and exploited them. He was a surgeon, not a soldier. His point count slowly but steadily began to climb. He rounded a corner and saw the girl from the hangar, Achiko Uraraka. He'd learned her name was from the student roster. She was in trouble. She was fast and agile, using her quirk to make large pieces of debris weightless, and then batting them into the drones. It was a clever strategy, but a massive 3-pointer had her pinned down, its heavy-caliber machine gun spitting plasma bolts that forced her behind a crumbling concrete barricade. Izuku's body moved before his brain could protest. He saw the drone's weakness, a large, exposed heat vent on its back. But he couldn't get a clear shot from his position. He needed a distraction. "Hey!" he yelled, stepping out from behind cover. "Scrap heap! Over here!" The 3-pointer's massive head swiveled, its red optical sensor locking onto him. It registered him as a low-level threat, no significant chrome, no energy weapon signature. It dismissed him, turning its attention back to Uraraka. Big mistake. While the drone was distracted, Izuku saw Uraraka's hand reach out and touch the massive concrete barricade she was hiding behind. The multi-ton block of ferroconcrete suddenly lifted an inch off the ground, its immense weight nullified. With a determined grunt, she shoved it. The huge block floated silently and swiftly towards the oblivious drone. Izuku saw his opening. While the drone was focused on him, and Uraraka's floating projectile was on its way, he acted. He sprinted to the side, vaulting over a wrecked vehicle to get a clear line of sight to the drone's back. He drew more power than he ever had before. Not 1%. 3%. The green circuitry-like lines flared up his arm, visible even in the daylight. The pain was a sharp, biting thing, and the recoil from the series of quick, targeted shots he fired made his entire skeleton ache, but he grit his teeth and pushed through it. Flick. 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 4 kinetic bullets, stronger than any he'd fired before, slammed into the drone's heat vent. The armor plating buckled. Alarms blared from the machine as its core temperature began to skyrocket. It turned, its machine gun swinging towards Izuku, but it was too late. Uraraka's floating barricade arrived, smashing into the drone's side with the force of a silent freight train. The impact sent the already overheating machine staggering sideways, its balance completely thrown. It stumbled, and then, with a final, screeching groan of protesting metal, its power core went critical. It exploded in a massive, satisfying fireball. Silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the flames. Izuku stood panting, his arm throbbing with a deep, pulsating ache. Uraraka emerged from behind another piece of cover, her face smudged with soot. "Wow," she said, her eyes wide. "That was amazing teamwork." She jogged over to him, a bright, genuine smile on her face. "I'm Achiko Uraraka. Thanks for the save. I had a plan, but you definitely made it work better." "I Izuku Midoriya," he stammered, feeling his face flush. "It was nothing. Your plan was the amazing part. Using your quirk like that was brilliant." "Oh, well, I'm just trying to make ends meet," she said with a light-hearted laugh, though Izuku saw a flicker of genuine stress in her eyes. "My family runs a small grav-lift construction business. It's been tough with the big corporations squeezing us out. Getting a runner license from UA is my best shot at getting high-paying contracts to help them out." Before they could continue, a deep, rumbling groan shook the entire cityscape. A section of the street ahead of them collapsed, and something colossal began to rise from the dust and debris. It was the 0-pointer. It was a Goliath, a mech easily 20 stories tall, its head scraping the undersides of the simulated skyscrapers. It wasn't designed to be fought. It was an obstacle, an arena trap as the announcer had said. It was there to instill fear and force the students to scatter, and scatter they did. The other students in the area, seeing the monstrous robot, turned and fled, screaming. Its purpose was to test their threat assessment and decision-making, not their combat prowess. As Izuku and Uraraka were about to do the same, a pained cry cut through the noise. A student was trapped. A piece of falling debris had pinned their leg. They were lying directly in the path of the zero-pointer's massive, building-sized foot. Izuku froze. His mind screamed at him to run. This was a test. The logical choice was to save himself. Fighting that thing was impossible. It was suicide. Attacking it was worth 0 points. There was no reward. He looked at the trapped student. He looked at the giant robot, a symbol of overwhelming, unstoppable power. He thought of the runner in the alley. He thought of the scrappers. He thought of a world where people looked away, where they made the logical choice and let others suffer. He looked at Uraraka, and he saw the same horrified conflict in her eyes. And in that moment, something inside him, the same illogical, heroic impulse that had made him throw the EMP grenade, took over. There are no points for saving someone, he thought. But a hero doesn't act for points. Uraraka-san! He yelled, his voice clear and commanding, devoid of its usual stutter. Can you make me weightless? She stared at him, her eyes wide. She didn't understand his plan, but she saw the look on his face. The absolute, terrifying certainty. She nodded. On my signal! He shouted, and then he was running. Not away. He was running directly towards the zero-pointer. He could feel the thrum of One for All, a roaring inferno in his chest. He wasn't thinking about percentages anymore. He wasn't thinking about control. He was thinking about the trapped student. He was thinking about all the times he had been helpless. He was thinking of All Might's smile. He channeled it. All of it. He took the entire, raging ocean of power and funneled it not into his arm, but into his legs. His endoskeleton groaned, the microhydraulics screaming as they were pushed far beyond their design specifications. The green lines of One for All blazed across his legs, so bright they were like twin bolts of lightning. Now! He roared. Uraraka, who had sprinted to keep up with him, slapped both of her hands on his back. For a single, disorienting second, Izuku's weight vanished. He was a feather, and then he jumped. The combined force of a 100% power-up and zero gravity turned him into a living cannonball. He didn't just jump. He erupted. He shot into the sky, a green comet ascending towards the heavens, the sound barrier shattering in his wake. He flew past the 10th floor, the 15th, his upward momentum finally beginning to slow as he reached the colossal head of the zero-pointer. Gravity reasserted itself. Now, he was falling. He twisted in midair, facing the robot. He saw its massive, single red optic, as big as a car, tracking his descent. He pulled his right arm back. This was it. All the pain. All the training. He poured every drop of One for All, every ounce of his will, every memory of his hero, into this one, single action. He wasn't thinking about his bones. He wasn't thinking about the consequences. He was thinking, save them. The green energy coalesced, so dense and bright it was almost white. He remembered All Might's voice, from a data log he'd watched 1,000 times. The key is to focus the power at the point of impact. His fist, glowing like a miniature sun, connected with the zero-pointer's head. Smash! He screamed, the word torn from the very depths of his soul. The world became sound and fury. The force of the impact was biblical. The robot's head didn't just dent. It imploded. A shockwave, visible as a ripple in the air, erupted outwards, shattering every window in the surrounding city blocks. The metal plating of the Goliath's face peeled back like foil, and its head was driven down into its torso with a deafening, grinding shriek of tortured metal. The colossal machine shuddered. Its optic flickered and died. It froze for a moment, a monument to its own destruction, and then it began to topple backwards, away from the trapped student, crashing down into the cityscape with a ground-shaking boom that could be heard all across campus. Izuku was still in the air, suspended for a moment in the aftermath of his own impossible feat. He looked down at his arm. It was ruined. The skin was shredded, dyed a deep, horrific purple and black from massive internal bleeding. The reinforced endoskeleton had held for a microsecond longer than his bones would have, but it too had been overwhelmed. Twisted shards of carbon nanofiber and shattered polymer were sticking out of his flesh at odd angles. His arm was a mangled, useless wreck. The pain hit him then, a wave of agony so absolute and all-consuming that it stole his breath and blacked out his vision. And then, he realized he was still 100 feet in the air. And he was falling. He tumbled through the air, his consciousness fading, his last coherent thought a simple, resigned, "Oh." He was going to die. A heroic, stupid, and very, very messy death. He was 10 feet from the ground when a sharp slap hit him across the face. His body, which had felt impossibly heavy, suddenly became weightless again. His terminal velocity vanished. He stopped falling, and instead began to float gently, an inch from the pavement. Uraraka stood below him, her face pale, one hand outstretched towards him. She had used her quirk to save him, but the effort of catching a falling body and nullifying its momentum, on top of everything else she had done, had pushed her to her limit. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed. Just before she hit the ground, a wave of nausea overcame her, a common side effect of her quirk's overuse. The klaxon sounded again, signaling the end of the exam. Izuku lay floating, his body a universe of pain, drifting in and out of consciousness. Through the ringing in his ears, he could hear the sound of approaching footsteps. Students were emerging from their hiding places, staring in stunned, silent awe at the wreckage of the zero-pointer, and then at him. He saw Ida, his face a mask of disbelief. He saw other faces he didn't recognize, all filled with a mixture of shock and reverence. And then he saw Bakugo. The explosive prodigy was standing at the edge of the crowd, his usual sneer completely gone. He was staring at the destroyed Goliath, then at Izuku's mangled arm, then back at the robot. His face was a complex canvas of raw, undiluted shock, confusion, and a new, unfamiliar emotion that looked terrifyingly like grudging respect. The fleshy, the useless Deku, the worthless nerd he had tormented his entire life, had just done that. The foundations of Bakugo's entire world, a world built on the idea of his own inherent superiority, had just been shattered by a single, impossible punch. Izuku's vision was blurring, the faces all melting together. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him completely was the wrinkled, familiar face of Chio, recovery girl, the Academy's chief medical officer, leaning over him, her magnified eyes filled with a mixture of concern and profound annoyance. "Good heavens!" she muttered, her voice the final sound he heard. "Another one like him. This is going to be a long year."